Deep in southern Africa lies the ruins of a city that should not have existed. A city of towering stone walls. Tonight, we uncover the forgotten story of Great Zimbabwe. Hidden among the rolling highlands of southern Africa lies the silent remains of a city that once commanded wealth, power, and influence across an entire region. Today, only its stone walls remain. Its people are gone. Its voices have faded, and much of its story has been swallowed by time. This was Great Zimbabwe, the capital of a powerful medieval kingdom, a thriving center of trade whose influence reached far beyond the African interior, connecting distant lands through networks that stretched across the Indian Ocean and into Asia. Yet for centuries, much of the outside world struggled to accept its existence. The idea that a vast stone city, the largest ever built in pre-colonial sub-Saharan Africa, could have been constructed by an indigenous African civilization seemed impossible to many early European visitors. Rather than accept the evidence before them, they created elaborate theories and myths to explain it away. Tonight, we will leave those myths behind. Instead, we will walk slowly through the ruins themselves and listen to what the stones still have to say. Together, we will explore the rise of a remarkable kingdom, uncover the source of its wealth, and follow the quiet path that eventually led to its decline and abandonment. But before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these journeys through history. Your support truly helps the channel. And if you're already settled in for the night, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Feel free to share your city and local time in the comments below. As for me, I'm recording this in the peaceful hours of the early morning, a little after 2 a.m. on a Wednesday here in the United States. Now dim the lights. Perhaps switch on a fan for a gentle background hum. Get comfortable, and let us travel back through time. The quiet sound of the room slowly fades away. In its place comes the warm breath of the African savanna. A steady wind moves through tall grass. The air smells of dry earth baked beneath the sun and carries the faint sweetness of wild vegetation. You find yourself standing on a vast plateau in the country now known as Zimbabwe. The landscape stretches endlessly in every direction. Scattered across the plains are enormous granite outcrops known as koppies. Their rounded shapes rise from the earth like ancient giants sleeping beneath the African sky. And nestled among these granite hills, you finally see it. Not a pyramid, not a towering temple, but something far more unexpected. An entire city built from stone. Silent, weathered, timeless. This is Great Zimbabwe. Today it is a ghost city. But 600 years ago it was alive with activity. At its height during the 14th century, nearly 20,000 people called this place home. Merchants, farmers, craftsmen, priests, nobles, and kings all lived within a thriving urban center that served as the heart of a powerful kingdom. Trade routes connected this city to distant ports on the Indian Ocean. Goods traveled thousands of miles, linking Great Zimbabwe to merchants from Arabia, India, Persia, and even China. Yet despite its importance, the people who built this city left behind no written chronicles, no royal records, no detailed histories, no inscriptions carved into stone. Their words disappeared with time. What remains are the ruins themselves, the walls, the foundations, the artifacts buried beneath the soil. These silent remnants are the only witnesses left to tell the story. As you walk through the ruins, one feature immediately captures your attention: the extraordinary craftsmanship. The city was built using local granite, a stone that naturally fractures into flat, block-like pieces. These stones were carefully shaped and stacked together with astonishing precision. No mortar was used, no cement, no binding material of any kind. The builders relied entirely on skill, balance, and engineering knowledge. The result is remarkable. Centuries later, many of these walls still stand. This technique, known as dry stone construction, required immense patience and expertise. The craftsmen who built Great Zimbabwe mastered it to a level rarely seen anywhere in the medieval world. Even the name of the city reflects its significance. The word Zimbabwe comes from the Shona language and is commonly translated as houses of stone or venerated stone buildings. It is a fitting name. So powerful was the memory of this ancient city that the modern nation of Zimbabwe eventually adopted it as its own. Yet the story of Great Zimbabwe became entangled in controversy when European explorers encountered the ruins during the 19th century. Many refused to believe that local African societies could have created such an impressive structure. Their assumptions blinded them. Instead of accepting the evidence, they searched for foreign builders. Some claimed the city had been constructed by ancient Phoenicians. Others connected it to Egypt. A few even suggested links to the legendary Queen of Sheba. These theories gained popularity despite lacking any real evidence. Meanwhile, the stones remained silent. They had witnessed the reigns of Shona rulers. They had heard the ceremonies, the songs, and the conversations of generations long gone. Later, they listened to the confident claims of colonists and adventurers, and through it all, they endured, patiently waiting for the truth to emerge. As your journey continues, you approach the most famous structure within the city. Its immense stone walls dominate the landscape. Their purpose remains one of the greatest mysteries of Great Zimbabwe. This is the Great Enclosure, the largest ancient structure in the entire complex. You walk beside its outer wall. The stonework curves gracefully across the landscape in a sweeping elliptical shape. Nothing about it feels rigid or mechanical. Instead, it seems almost organic, as though it grew naturally from the earth itself. The wall rises more than 30 feet high in places. Its circumference stretches for hundreds of feet. Nearly 1 million granite blocks were used in its construction, each one quarried, transported, and carefully positioned by hand. And once again, there is no mortar. Only precision, only craftsmanship, only an extraordinary understanding of balance and structure. The workmanship is mesmerizing. Layer upon layer of stone rises in neat courses toward the sky. Near the upper sections, decorative chevron patterns run across the surface, adding elegance to an already impressive monument. This was never intended to be a fortress. There are no defensive towers, no battlements, no arrow slits. The great enclosure was built for authority rather than warfare. Its purpose was to create a sacred and exclusive space, a place that separated rulers from ordinary citizens, a physical expression of status, power, and prestige. Passing through one of the narrow entrances, you enter a maze of smaller walls and enclosed courtyards. Archaeologists discovered evidence that these spaces once contained circular dwellings constructed from clay and gravel, topped with thatched roofs. Today, only the stone foundations remain, but the city was once full of life. Cooking fires burned here. Families gathered here. Ceremonies were performed here. The stone walls formed the framework, but the people gave the city its soul. As centuries passed, the clay structures slowly dissolved back into the earth, leaving only faint traces behind. Eventually, you arrive at one of the enclosure's most intriguing features, the parallel passage, a long, narrow corridor running between two massive walls. The space is surprisingly confined. At some points, you can nearly touch both sides at once. Its purpose remains uncertain. Yet, as you walk through the passage, something feels unusual. The acoustics are remarkable. Even a quiet whisper seems to travel effortlessly through the corridor. It feels ceremonial, intentional, a pathway designed for ritual rather than practicality. Perhaps royal processions once passed through here. Perhaps initiates walked this route during sacred ceremonies. Or perhaps its true purpose has been completely lost to history. The stones offer no answers, only questions. Standing within the enclosure, you lift your gaze toward the north. There, rising above the valley, stands a massive granite hill, and among its giant boulders are older ruins, older than the great enclosure itself, older than much of the city below. This was the original center of power. The first royal residence, the sacred heart of ancient Great Zimbabwe, the place where kings once lived and where spirits were believed to dwell, known today as the Hill Complex. Leaving the great walls behind, you begin the climb toward this ancient summit, and with every step you move deeper into the oldest chapter of Great Zimbabwe's story. Your journey now leads to an even older, more sacred, and more strategically important part of Great Zimbabwe. The path ahead is steep and winding. It twists upward through a dramatic landscape of enormous granite boulders scattered across the hillside in what seems at first glance to be complete disorder. Some of these rocks are as large as houses. For millions of years, wind, rain, and time have shaped their smooth surfaces. To most people, such terrain would appear difficult and inconvenient. But the builders of Great Zimbabwe saw something different. They saw opportunity. As you climb higher, you begin to understand their vision. Unlike the great enclosure below, the hill complex was not constructed on open ground. Instead, it was woven directly into the mountain itself. Stone walls emerge from the tops of giant boulders. Narrow passageways snake between natural rock formations. Hidden corridors appear where small gaps between colossal stones were enclosed and transformed into entrances. Everywhere you look, nature and architecture blend seamlessly together. The result is extraordinary. It feels less like a city built upon a mountain and more like a city growing out of it. This is the oldest surviving part of Great Zimbabwe. Archaeological evidence suggests that construction here began as early as the 11th century, long before the great enclosure dominated the valley below, long before the city reached the height of its power. This hill was the original royal residence, the home of the first kings, the birthplace of the kingdom itself. If the great enclosure later became the political center of the nation, then the hill complex was something far deeper, its spiritual heart, its sacred center, the place where rulers connected their authority to the world of ancestors and spirits. Eventually, you reach the summit. The view is breathtaking. From this elevated position, the entire valley unfolds beneath you. The sweeping curve of the great enclosure is clearly visible below. Beyond it stretch the remains of countless homes that once housed thousands of people. You can easily understand why this location held such importance. A king standing here could see nearly everything: his capital, his people, his herds, his kingdom. The hill complex itself is a maze of walls, terraces, chambers, and narrow pathways. Archaeologists believe different areas served different purposes. Some spaces may have housed the royal family. Others may have accommodated members of the court. Still others likely functioned as gathering places for ceremonies and public events. Yet among all these structures, one area stands above the rest in significance: the eastern enclosure. This was likely the most sacred location in all of Great Zimbabwe. It was here that archaeologists discovered the famous Zimbabwe birds, carved from soapstone. These mysterious sculptures remain among the most iconic symbols of the nation today. Many scholars believe they represented royal ancestors or spiritual messengers connecting the earthly world with the divine. Perhaps this was where kings communicated with the spirits of those who came before them, the guardians of the kingdom, the protectors of dynasties, the unseen companions of every ruler. Imagine standing here at dawn, the first sunlight touching the highest stones, the valley below still wrapped in morning mist. A king or high priest gazes across the sleeping kingdom. Behind him, the sacred enclosure. Before him, the world he governs. This was a place designed to inspire power, but also humility. A place where earthly authority and spiritual responsibility met. Even today, historians continue to debate the exact relationship between the hill complex and the great enclosure below. When later rulers built grand residences in the valley, did this hill become exclusively a religious center? Or did kings continue moving between both locations, conducting political affairs below while returning here for sacred ceremonies and important rituals? The answer remains uncertain. The stones keep their secrets. What is certain is that the silence surrounding you now would have been unimaginable during the city's golden age. This hill was once alive. Drums echoed across the valley. Priests chanted prayers. Sacred fires burned through the night. Voices filled the passages. The silence of today is not ancient. It is modern. It is simply the absence of sounds that once dominated this landscape. As you stand at the summit, your eyes drift once more toward the great enclosure below. From this height, you can clearly see a curious structure rising from its center. Unlike anything else in the city, a perfectly shaped stone form. Simple, elegant, mysterious. This is the conical tower, and to understand Great Zimbabwe, you must now descend the hill and stand before it. You leave the summit behind. Following ancient pathways, you make your way back toward the valley floor. Soon, the towering walls of the great enclosure surround you once more. Passing through its inner corridors and narrow ceremonial passages, you arrive at the most protected section of the royal complex. And there it stands, the most enigmatic monument in the entire city. The conical tower. At first glance, it appears almost deceptively simple. A perfectly formed cone of stone rising more than 30 feet into the air. Its granite blocks were laid with the same astonishing precision seen throughout Great Zimbabwe. Every course carefully positioned, every line deliberate, every stone exactly where it was intended to be. Yet what makes the tower remarkable is not its appearance. It is its complete solidity. There is no entrance, no chamber, no staircase, no hidden room, no interior at all. The tower is entirely solid, a monument that cannot be entered, a structure that seems to exist purely as a symbol. And that symbol remains one of the greatest mysteries in African archaeology. For generations, scholars have debated its meaning. The most widely accepted interpretation views the tower as a symbolic grain bin. In Shona society, grain represented survival, security, prosperity. A ruler who controlled food supplies, protected his people during drought and famine. An overflowing granary was therefore a powerful symbol of wealth and responsibility. Seen through this lens, the tower becomes a permanent stone representation of abundance, a monument celebrating the king's role as provider. Other interpretations have suggested different meanings. Some scholars see it as a fertility symbol connected to royal authority and the continuity of the kingdom. Others have proposed astronomical functions, although evidence supporting such theories remains limited. Without written records, certainty is impossible. No surviving document explains why the tower was built. No inscription tells us what it represented. Only the people who constructed it knew its true meaning, and they left no explanation behind. That is the quiet tragedy of Great Zimbabwe. The builders understood every symbol, every ritual, every sacred space, but they never wrote their knowledge down. Today, we are left trying to reconstruct their world from stone alone. Whatever its precise purpose, one thing seems clear. The conical tower was not merely decorative, it was important, profoundly important. It occupied the symbolic center of the royal enclosure. The royal enclosure stood at the center of the city, and the city itself stood at the center of the kingdom. In many ways, the tower became the still point around which the entire world of Great Zimbabwe revolved. You can almost imagine ceremonies unfolding around it, priests offering prayers, nobles gathering in silence, kings standing before the monument as sacred rituals connected earthly rule with spiritual authority. And now, after exploring the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the mysterious tower, you begin to see Great Zimbabwe not simply as a collection of ruins, but as the capital of something far larger, a wealthy kingdom, a thriving civilization, a powerful trading empire. And that empire was built upon a glittering foundation, gold. To truly understand Great Zimbabwe, we must leave the ruins behind. We must travel back to the 14th century, back to the kingdom's golden age, back to the mines, the trade routes, and the sources of wealth that transformed this remote African plateau into one of the most important centers in the medieval world. The ruins fade, the centuries disappear, and suddenly the city lives once more. Smoke rises from cooking fires, voices fill the air, the streets are alive with movement. You have arrived in the 14th century, the golden age of Great Zimbabwe. You now stand upon the high plateau of Zimbabwe, searching for the true source of the kingdom's power. Not its walls, not its kings, not even its sacred monuments. The answer lies beneath your feet. Gold. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe did not come from a single legendary mine hidden deep within the earth. Instead, it emerged from thousands of small mining sites scattered across the vast granite landscape of southern Africa, each one modest in appearance, each one contributing a small piece to a much larger story. As you approach one of these ancient workings, it appears almost unremarkable. A narrow opening in the ground, a dark shaft disappearing into the earth. Yet from places like this, the wealth of an empire was born. Imagine a Shona miner at work. His body is lean and strong, shaped by years of demanding labor. His world is not an enormous open pit mine. It is a cramped vertical shaft carved deep into solid granite. Some descend more than 100 feet below the surface. The conditions are harsh. The air is hot. The darkness is complete. Ventilation is poor. Every descent carries risk. A collapsing tunnel, a sudden flood, a falling stone. Danger is a constant companion. Yet generation after generation, miners continued their work. The process required patience as much as courage. When miners located a gold-bearing quartz vein, they followed it downward into the earth. Breaking the rock was slow and difficult. Their primary technique was known as fire setting. First, bundles of dry wood were carried into the depths of the shaft. A fire was built directly against the rock face and allowed to burn for hours. Gradually, the granite became intensely heated. Then came the most dangerous stage. Cold water was poured onto the glowing stone. The sudden change in temperature caused the rock to crack and fracture. Only then could the miner return with his simple tools. an iron chisel, a heavy hammer, an endless determination. Piece by piece, he chipped away at the shattered quartz. The work was exhausting, slow, hot, and often dangerous. Yet each fragment brought him closer to the glittering treasure hidden within. Ironically, the miner himself would rarely witness the distant value of the gold he extracted. To him, it was simply another day's labor, another sack of stone hauled toward the surface. Once the quartz reached daylight, the process continued. Here, another group joined the effort, often the women of the village. The ore was crushed using large grinding stones until it became a fine powder. This powder was then carried to nearby streams. There, using simple wooden bowls, women carefully separated gold from stone. Water was added. The bowl was gently rotated. Again and again, the lighter material washed away. The heavier gold remained. Slowly, tiny golden flecks collected at the bottom. After hours of patient work, a small pile of shimmering gold dust appeared. It was a perfect partnership of labor. Men extracted the ore from deep beneath the earth. Women refined it beneath the open sky. Together, they transformed ordinary stone into extraordinary wealth. Historians still debate how this industry was organized. Was it controlled directly by the king? Did royal officials oversee production and collect gold as tribute? Or were local communities responsible for mining, trading their gold independently with merchants from the capital? The answer remains uncertain. What is certain is the importance of that tiny pile of glittering dust. In the palm of a woman's hand, it may not seem impressive, yet this was the fuel of an empire. It financed trade, built monuments, connected distant worlds. Gold from these remote villages would eventually purchase Chinese porcelain, Persian ceramics, and Indian glass beads. Its journey had only just begun. But gold was not the kingdom's only source of wealth. Another treasure came not from beneath the earth, but from the vast grasslands stretching toward the horizon. The image of glittering gold slowly fades. The darkness of the mine disappears, and once again you stand beneath the wide African sky. Here, another source of prosperity roamed freely across the savannah, the elephant. The second great pillar of Great Zimbabwe's wealth. Imagine joining a small group of Shona hunters. These men are not ordinary hunters. They are specialists, experts whose knowledge has been passed from one generation to the next. They move silently through the grasslands, reading signs invisible to most people. A broken branch, a disturbed patch of earth, a footprint larger than a dinner plate. Each clue reveals the passage of an elephant. In the medieval world, ivory was among the most valuable luxury materials on earth. Its reputation stretched across continents, from Europe to the Middle East, from India to imperial China. Master craftsmen transformed ivory into works of art, religious carvings, jewelry boxes, sword handles, chess pieces, luxury goods reserved for society's wealthiest members. African ivory was especially prized. The tusks of the savanna elephant were larger and easier to carve than those of many other species. Demand seemed limitless. The hunt itself required extraordinary patience. Days might pass before the hunters finally encountered their quarry. Every movement was deliberate. Every decision carried risk. This was not recreation. It was survival. It was trade, and it was deeply connected to spiritual beliefs. Many hunters viewed the elephant with profound respect. Some may have offered prayers before the hunt, acknowledging the animal's strength, its wisdom, its importance. The elephant was not merely a source of wealth. It was a powerful presence within the natural world. Eventually, After days of tracking, the hunters find him, a massive bull elephant. His tusks gleam beneath the African sun. What follows is a brief but dangerous encounter, a test of skill, courage, and experience. Once the hunt is complete, nothing is wasted. The ivory tusks are carefully removed, but every part of the animal serves a purpose. The meat provides food for entire communities. The hide becomes shields, sandals, and belts. The sinews become bowstrings. Only the tusks will travel across oceans. Yet every part of the animal contributes to village life. The ivory trade became one of the most important economic activities in medieval southern Africa. Demand from merchants operating within the Indian Ocean trade network encouraged extensive hunting and commerce. Tusks from the Zimbabwean plateau would eventually reach markets thousands of miles away. Today, historians still debate the long-term environmental consequences of this trade. Was hunting conducted at sustainable levels? Or did growing international demand gradually reduce elephant populations in the region? The evidence remains uncertain. What is clear is that ivory played a major role in the kingdom's prosperity. Standing on the plateau, you now see the two foundations upon which Great Zimbabwe was built: gold and ivory. One required people to descend into darkness. The other demanded they face the largest land animal on earth. Both required patience. Both required skill. Both required courage. And together they created immense wealth. Now the gold dust and ivory tusks begin the next stage of their journey. The raw materials of empire, the products that connected a remote African kingdom to distant civilizations. Their destination is the same: the capital city, Great Zimbabwe, the center of power, the home of kings, the beating heart of the kingdom. And so we follow them. As we do, the silent ruins of the present slowly fade away. The centuries disappear. Stone walls become new once more. The city awakens. The streets fill with life. Voices return. Smoke rises into the sky. And before you stands Great Zimbabwe at the height of its golden age, a thriving metropolis at the center of one of medieval Africa's greatest civilizations. It is now the 14th century, and you are walking through Great Zimbabwe at the height of its power. The city is alive. The great stone monuments dominate the landscape. The hill complex rises above the valley, while the great enclosure stands as a symbol of royal authority. Yet these famous stone structures represent only a small part of the city. The real life of Great Zimbabwe unfolds beyond the walls. Across the valley floor stretches a vast settlement of thousands of circular homes built from clay, timber, and thatch. This is where most of the kingdom's people live. Farmers, herders, potters, weavers, blacksmiths, families, whose labor sustains the entire empire. The city is filled with sound. Cattle low in nearby enclosures. Goats bleat among the houses. Children laugh and chase one another through narrow pathways. Women rhythmically pound millet and sorghum into flour. Smoke rises from countless cooking fires, carrying the scent of wood and earth into the warm air. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe may have been home to nearly 18,000 people, making it one of the largest urban centers in all of southern Africa. Its society was complex and highly organized. Most people lived in the bustling settlements below. Meanwhile, the king, his court, and the highest religious authorities likely occupied the more exclusive spaces protected by the great stone walls. As you walk through the city, you witness skilled craftsmen at work. Women shape clay into elegant pottery. Their experienced hands transform ordinary earth into beautiful vessels. After firing, many pots are polished with graphite, giving them a dark, metallic shine that catches the sunlight. Nearby, blacksmiths work beside glowing furnaces. Sweat glistens on their arms as they pump bellows and strike heated iron with heavy hammers. The ringing sound echoes across the settlement, a constant rhythm, a soundtrack of productivity. They forge farming tools needed to cultivate the land, axes for cutting timber, hoes for agriculture, spearheads for hunting and defense. This is the true engine of the kingdom. Gold and ivory generate wealth, but daily life depends on the labor of ordinary people. The farmer, the potter, the blacksmith, the herder. Without them, the city could not survive. And among all forms of wealth, one stood above the rest: cattle for the Shona people. Cattle represented status, prosperity, and social standing. A person's importance was often measured not by the amount of gold they possessed, but by the size of their herds. The king and the nobles owned vast numbers of cattle that grazed across the surrounding grasslands. These animals provided food, labor, prestige, and security, while foreign merchants admired Great Zimbabwe for its gold. The people who lived here may have considered cattle their greatest treasure. Archaeological excavations support this idea. Large quantities of cattle bones have been discovered throughout the site, particularly in elite areas associated with the ruling class. Beef appears to have been an important symbol of privilege and status. Historians continue to debate the exact relationship between the ruling elite and the common population. Was the kingdom organized like a feudal society, with farmers owing labor and tribute to the king? Or was it a more flexible arrangement in which communities managed their own affairs while providing tribute in exchange for protection, stability, and spiritual leadership? The evidence remains open to interpretation. What is certain is that Great Zimbabwe functioned through cooperation between rulers and the thousands of people whose daily work sustained the kingdom. Imagine the city on a busy market day. Villagers arrive from across the surrounding countryside. Some bring grain, others bring livestock. Others arrive carrying pottery, tools, woven goods, and food. The marketplace becomes a gathering place for trade, conversation, and community. It is a scene familiar throughout human history, a reminder that despite differences in culture and geography, cities everywhere share certain rhythms, and among the crowds arrive the kingdom's most valuable commodities. Men return from the mining regions carrying small leather bags filled with gold dust. Others arrive from distant hunting grounds bearing massive elephant tusks. Together they carry the wealth that connects Great Zimbabwe to the wider world. Yet these treasures will not remain here for long. Their journey is only beginning. Soon they will leave the city behind and travel toward the coast, toward distant markets, toward the Indian Ocean, and so we join the great caravan. The magnificent city gradually disappears behind us. The sounds of the marketplace fade into the distance. Ahead lies a journey far longer and more difficult than most people imagine. This is not the world of camel caravans crossing the Sahara. Southern Africa presents different challenges. The presence of the deadly tsetse fly made pack animals unreliable in many regions. As a result, much of the trade moved on human shoulders. You become part of a long procession stretching across the landscape, a human river flowing eastward. The porters are strong, experienced men accustomed to long journeys. Each carries a heavy burden. Some balance loads upon their heads. Others secure them to their backs. A few carry valuable elephant tusks. Others transport dense leather bags filled with gold dust. These men are the forgotten link in one of the medieval world's great trade networks. We often remember the gold, the merchants, the ships, but every ounce of wealth first had to be carried across hundreds of miles of wilderness by people willing to endure the journey. The route to the coast was long and demanding. Most likely it followed a network of trails, leading toward the Save River and eventually to the Swahili port of Sofala in present-day Mozambique. The journey covered more than 250 miles, a trek that could take weeks, perhaps even longer. Day after day, the caravan moves forward. The sun rises. The men walk. The sun sets. The men continue. The soundscape is simple. Bare feet striking dusty paths. Quiet conversations in the Shona language. The endless chorus of insects, birds, and distant animals. Slowly, the landscape begins to change. The high plateau gives way to lower elevations. The air becomes warmer, more humid. The vegetation grows denser. Open grasslands are replaced by forests and river valleys. The journey is not without danger. Predators roam the wilderness. Lions, leopards, elephants, and perhaps most dangerous of all, other people. The caravan passes through numerous territories controlled by local chiefs. A group carrying gold and ivory would have been an attractive target. Success required diplomacy as much as endurance. Caravan leaders needed to know where tribute should be paid, which routes were safe, which communities welcomed traders, and which should be avoided entirely. Some historical accounts even describe forms of silent trade, systems in which merchants who shared neither language nor culture exchanged goods without direct communication. Such stories remind us how complex and interconnected these trade networks truly were. Even today, archaeologists debate exactly how this commerce functioned. Was it tightly controlled by the King of Zimbabwe, or was it a decentralized system in which goods gradually passed from one community to another until they finally reached the coast? The answer remains uncertain. But eventually, after many days of travel, something changes. A new scent appears in the air. Sharp, fresh, unfamiliar. Salt. The smell grows stronger with every mile. For someone raised deep within the African interior, it must have seemed almost magical. The scent of a world beyond the horizon. The scent of distant lands. The scent of the sea. And then, at last, you see it. The forest opens. The land falls away. Before you stretches an endless expanse of brilliant blue water. The Indian Ocean. For the first time, the world seems impossibly vast. And nestled along the coastline sits a bustling port city. Its stone buildings rise above the shoreline. Its harbor is filled with strange vessels carrying tall triangular sails. Its streets are crowded with people from many different lands. Africans, Arabs, Persians, Indians, merchants from worlds far beyond the horizon. You have reached Sofala, the gateway between Great Zimbabwe and the wider world, and the next chapter of our journey is about to begin. You have arrived at Sofala. The long journey is finally over. Leaving the deep green forests behind, you step into a world unlike anything you have seen before. The quiet villages of the interior feel impossibly distant. Even Great Zimbabwe itself seems far away. Everything here is different. The air is warm and heavy with humidity. A constant breeze carries the sharp scent of salt from the sea. The architecture is unfamiliar. Instead of circular huts made from clay and thatch, the city is filled with tall coral stone buildings. Many rise several stories above the narrow streets. Their walls glow pale beneath the tropical sun. Beautifully carved wooden doors and shutters display the wealth of their owners. Everywhere you look, people move through winding streets crowded with merchants, sailors, laborers, and travelers. This is not a city that looks inward toward the land. It looks outward toward the sea, toward distant horizons, toward the vast interconnected world of the Indian Ocean. Sofala is a city of arrivals and departures, a gateway linking the African interior to the wider world. The crowds reflect this role perfectly. The porters who accompanied you from Great Zimbabwe move through the streets with expressions of exhaustion and wonder. Around them walk wealthy Swahili merchants dressed in fine imported textiles. Arabic conversations drift from the harbor. Persian traders negotiate prices in shaded courtyards. Indian merchants unload cargo from ships newly arrived from across the ocean. Different languages, different religions, different cultures, all meeting in a single place. This is one of the great crossroads of the medieval world. During the 14th century, Sofala was among the most important city-states along the Swahili coast, one of many prosperous trading centers stretching along East Africa's shoreline. Its prosperity came from a unique position. Sofala served as the primary maritime outlet for the wealth of Great Zimbabwe, the gold, the ivory, the riches of the interior. Everything flowed through this port. Without Great Zimbabwe, Sofala would never have become wealthy. Without Sofala, Great Zimbabwe could never have reached distant markets. The two worlds depended upon one another. The culture that developed here was equally remarkable. The Swahili people emerged from centuries of interaction between African coastal communities and merchants. Arriving from Arabia and Persia, trade brought people together. Marriage connected families, generations blended traditions. The result was something entirely unique. Neither purely African nor purely Arab, but something new. A distinct civilization shaped by the rhythm of the ocean. Even the name Swahili reflects this heritage. Derived from the Arabic word for coasts, it simply means the people of the coast. Their language, Kiswahili, is fundamentally African in structure, yet enriched by countless Arabic words acquired through centuries of exchange. Standing in Sofala feels like standing between two worlds. Behind you lies the ancient interior of Africa. Ahead stretches the maritime world of the Indian Ocean, and here, in this bustling port, those worlds meet. Historians continue to debate the exact relationship between Great Zimbabwe and the Swahili city-states. Did the inland kingdom directly control ports like Sofala? Or were these cities independent partners connected through mutually beneficial trade? The answer remains uncertain. But what is clear is that both prospered from their relationship. For the caravan porters, their role is complete. The gold dust and ivory tusks they carried across hundreds of miles have finally reached their destination. Soon they will exchange their cargo for imported goods, fine cotton cloth from India, salt from the coast, glazed ceramics from Persia, colorful glass beads, objects that will eventually make their own long journey back toward the interior. Yet they will carry something else home as well. Stories, stories of the endless ocean, stories of foreign merchants, stories of distant lands beyond the horizon. For many of these travelers, Sofala must have seemed almost magical, a place where the entire world appeared to gather. The first stage of the journey is complete. Gold and ivory have left the interior behind. Now they enter a new phase. They are carried into large stone warehouses owned by wealthy merchants. There they wait, waiting for ships, waiting for favorable winds, waiting for the next chapter of their journey. The caravan porters are paid, their goods exchanged. Slowly they begin the long return journey toward Great Zimbabwe. But the gold and ivory remain. Their fate now belongs to different people. Men of commerce, men of the sea. men who think not in miles, but in oceans. Let us step into the world of one such man. Imagine entering the home and trading house of a wealthy Swahili merchant. The building itself reflects his success. Tall, elegant, built from coral stone. Inside, the air is cool and shaded. The scent of exotic goods fills the rooms. Salt from the sea, sandalwood from distant lands, spices gathered from across the Indian Ocean. This merchant belongs to the educated and prosperous elite that governs the coastal cities. His clothing is finely made, his robe woven from imported cotton, an embroidered cap rests upon his head. He is a Muslim. His faith, like his business, connects him to an enormous network stretching from East Africa to Arabia, Persia, and India. He is a true citizen of the Indian Ocean world. Unlike the miners and hunters of the interior, his wealth comes from information, connections, negotiation, knowledge. He understands that an elephant, tusk purchased today in Sofala, may eventually be transformed into a luxury object in China. He understands how markets rise and fall, how prices fluctuate, how opportunities emerge. His world revolves around trade. The warehouse, the counting room, the harbor, these are his domains. His tools are very different from those used by farmers or miners. A set of bronze scales, an abacus, ink, paper, carefully maintained records. The Swahili cities were literate societies. Arabic script was widely used to record transactions, correspondence, and contracts. Every shipment mattered. Every agreement mattered. Every ounce of gold mattered. The scratching of a pen across paper carried just as much importance here as the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer carried in Great Zimbabwe. Scholars continue to debate how these merchants viewed themselves. Were they primarily African? Did they identify more closely with Arab or Persian traditions? The answer is likely all of these at once. Their identity was not divided, it was blended, a product of centuries of cultural exchange, a bridge connecting continents. You look around the merchant's warehouse, it is a treasury of worlds. On one side stand the products of Africa, elephant tusks stacked in neat rows, leather bags filled with gold dust, animal hides, rare woods, other valuable resources gathered from the interior. On the opposite side stand the treasures of Asia, brilliant blue and white porcelain from China, fine cotton textiles from India, beautiful glazed ceramics from Persia. Every object tells a story. Every object has crossed incredible distances. The merchant's life follows a rhythm older than any kingdom. The rhythm of the monsoon winds. He has purchased his cargo. Now he must wait, weeks, perhaps months, waiting for the winds to change direction, waiting for the great sailing ships of Arabia and Persia to return, waiting for nature to open the next chapter of trade. The ocean teaches patience. No merchant, no matter how wealthy, can command the wind. He can only wait for it. And when it finally arrives, an entire world begins to move. And then, one day, the waiting finally comes to an end. High above the harbor, a lookout standing atop the city's mosque scans the horizon. Suddenly, a cry rings out across Sofala. A sail has been spotted. Far out at sea, a distinctive triangular silhouette appears against the sky. Then another, and another. The fleet has arrived. The great Dhows of the Indian Ocean have returned. Almost overnight, the atmosphere of Sofala transforms. The quiet months of waiting are over. The harbor awakens. Ships crowd the waterfront. Their tall masts rise like a forest above the water. Sails flutter in the warm coastal breeze. Workers rush between warehouses and docks. Merchants gather to negotiate prices. The season of trade has begun. Imagine yourself standing among the crowds. All around you, laborers unload and load cargo with practiced efficiency. The treasures of Africa emerge from storage. Massive elephant tusks gleam in the sunlight. Leather bags filled with gold dust are carried carefully through the busy harbor. This is the raw wealth of a continent, powerful, natural, rare, and from the arriving ships comes another kind of treasure. Not raw materials, but finished creations, the artistic and technological achievements of distant civilizations. Workers carefully unload delicate porcelain from China, blue and white bowls, and elegant vases decorated with dragons, birds, and flowing patterns. These ceramics are masterpieces, so refined and durable that many people considered them almost magical. Among the wealthy elites of Africa and Europe, Chinese porcelain was one of the most coveted luxury goods in existence. Nearby, Persian pottery is stacked in neat rows. Some pieces glow with brilliant turquoise glazes. Others display elegant Arabic calligraphy painted across their surfaces. From India come bolts of finely woven cotton cloth and countless chests filled with brightly colored glass beads. These beads may seem simple, but in the African interior they are precious. Symbols of status, objects of beauty, sometimes even forms of currency. What unfolds before you is not merely trade. It is globalization centuries before the modern age. The Indian Ocean Trade Network connected distant societies across thousands of miles, and the evidence remains visible today. Archaeologists excavating Great Zimbabwe have uncovered fragments of Chinese Celadon pottery, Persian ceramics, and thousands of imported glass beads. Objects that traveled extraordinary distances. Proof that this inland African kingdom was connected to a vast international economy. The exchange is remarkable. Gold mined from African rock, ivory harvested from African elephants, exchanged for goods crafted in workshops thousands of miles away. Two worlds meeting, two forms of wealth changing hands. Standing here in Sofala, it becomes clear that the medieval world was far more interconnected than many people imagine. A porcelain bowl made in China might travel by ship to India. From India, it might be loaded onto another vessel bound for East Africa. After arriving in Sofala, it could be carried across hundreds of miles of wilderness by human porters. Eventually, it might find its way into the palace of a ruler in Great Zimbabwe. One object, thousands of miles, countless hands, a truly astonishing journey. Historians continue to debate the nature of this exchange. Was it a balanced partnership between sophisticated African kingdoms and the great trading societies of Asia? Or was it an early form of unequal trade in which raw African resources were exchanged for manufactured goods? A pattern that would later become far more exploitative during the colonial era. The answer is complex, yet there is no doubt that many people prospered from this system. Few benefited more than the merchants of Sofala. Our Swahili merchant stands at the very center of this web of commerce. He purchases gold and ivory from inland traders, then sells them to captains arriving from Arabia and Persia. In return, he purchases imported luxury goods and sells them back into the African interior. He is a bridge between worlds, a middleman whose knowledge is worth a fortune. His profits build elegant coral stone homes. They finance mosques. They help transform coastal cities into thriving centers of wealth and culture. Eventually, the transactions are completed. The ivory and gold are loaded aboard the waiting ships. Their next journey is about to begin, a journey powered not by human labor, not by horses, not by camels, but by one of nature's greatest invisible forces, the winds. As the harbor settles into a new rhythm, your attention turns toward the ships themselves, the vessels that make this entire system possible, the Dhow. Standing on the shoreline, you watch one preparing to depart. Its design is elegant, timeless, beautifully suited to the waters it sails. The hull is made of wood. In many cases, the planks are not secured with iron nails, but sewn together using strong cords made from coconut fiber. This ancient construction method created vessels that were remarkably flexible. Instead of fighting the sea, the ship moved with it, bending gently with the waves, absorbing their energy. Yet the true genius of the Dhow lies in its sail. Unlike the square sails used by Viking ships or Roman vessels, the Dhow employs a large triangular sail known as a lateen sail. This innovation transformed maritime trade. Square sails perform best when the wind blows directly behind them. The lateen sail offers far greater flexibility. A skilled navigator can sail at angles to the wind, changing direction more efficiently, traveling farther, exploring wider horizons. For centuries, this technology made the Dhow one of the most effective trading vessels in the world. Yet even the finest ship depends upon something greater. The monsoon winds. The Indian Ocean possesses one of the most reliable weather systems on Earth. For roughly 6 months each year, the winter monsoon blows steadily from Arabia and India toward East Africa. Then, as the seasons change, the winds reverse. The summer monsoon carries ships back toward Asia. The result is extraordinary. A natural highway stretching across an ocean, free, reliable, predictable. Merchants simply learned to move with it. A trader could leave the Persian Gulf, sail to Sofala, spend months conducting business, and then return home when the winds changed direction. The entire system operated according to nature's schedule, not human schedules. No one commanded the winds. Everyone obeyed them. In many ways, the economy of half the known world rose and fell with the rhythm of these seasonal currents. A great oceanic heartbeat. Breathing in, breathing out, year after year, generation after generation. The sailors who mastered these routes were among the finest navigators of their age. Arab and Swahili mariners crossed vast distances using the stars as their guide. They developed navigational instruments such as the Colonial, a simple but ingenious device used to determine latitude. They created charts, recorded routes, studied winds and currents. Long before modern navigation, they were crossing oceans with remarkable accuracy. Even today, historians continue to debate the origins of the Dhow itself. Was the lateen sail first developed in Arabia? Did it emerge from India? Or did it evolve from even older Mediterranean traditions? Its exact origins remain uncertain. What is certain is its success. For more than 1,000 years, the Dhow dominated the waters of the Indian Ocean. You watch as one such vessel finally leaves the harbor. Its great triangular sail fills with the southwest monsoon. Slowly, gracefully, it glides away from the African coast. In its hold rests gold mined from the Zimbabwean plateau, ivory gathered from the African savanna. Soon it will visit ports such as Kilwa and Mombasa, before continuing eastward across the ocean. The gold extracted by a miner deep beneath African rock may one day become a coin in India, or a necklace worn by a noblewoman in Delhi. The ivory carved by an artisan in China may eventually decorate the home of a wealthy official thousands of miles away. The medieval world was vast, yet it was far more connected than we often imagine. And the humble Dhow, guided by wind and stars, was one of the threads that stitched that world together. We have followed the story of Great Zimbabwe from its beginnings, We have seen how gold was extracted from the earth, how ivory was gathered from the savannah, how caravans carried these treasures across hundreds of miles, how merchants traded them along the shores of the Indian Ocean, and how a magnificent kingdom rose to become one of the most powerful societies in medieval Africa. But no golden age lasts forever. And now our story begins to change. The great dhows, loaded with gold and ivory, disappear into the sunrise. The ports of the Indian Ocean continue their endless cycle of trade. Yet our attention turns back toward the African interior, back to the high plateau, back to the city whose stone walls still stand today. We return to Great Zimbabwe, but the world is no longer the same. It is now the 15th century. The kingdom remains impressive. The walls still stand. The cattle still graze. The markets still function. Yet something has begun to change. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly. The city's golden age is coming to an end. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Great Zimbabwe is remarkably simple. Why was it abandoned? Why did tens of thousands of people gradually leave one of the most successful cities in southern Africa? Unlike many ancient cities, there is no evidence of a dramatic destruction, no burned layers of ash, no signs of conquest, no traces of a devastating plague. Archaeology tells a different story, a slower story, a quieter story. The evidence suggests that Great Zimbabwe was not destroyed. It was left behind. Over generations, people simply moved away. The city slowly emptied. The walls remained. The voices disappeared. Among the many explanations proposed by historians, one of the most intriguing concerns a surprisingly ordinary resource, not gold, not ivory, not precious stones, salt. At first glance, the idea seems almost absurd. How could one of Africa's wealthiest kingdoms be threatened by something as common as salt? Yet the more closely we look, the more important it becomes. Salt is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Every human requires it. Every animal requires it. And in Great Zimbabwe, cattle were the foundation of wealth, status, and social life. Without healthy cattle, the kingdom's economy would suffer. Without salt, healthy cattle become impossible. The problem was geographical. The Zimbabwean plateau contained no major natural sources of salt. There were no extensive salt deposits, no large salt springs, no coastline nearby. Every ounce of salt had to be imported from distant regions. Some arrived from the Indian Ocean coast. Other supplies came from salt-producing areas far to the southwest. This made salt one of the kingdom's most strategically important resources. The routes carrying salt inward were every bit as important as those carrying gold outward. If those routes were disrupted, the consequences could be severe. Why might such disruption occur? Perhaps new political rivals gained control of important trade corridors. Perhaps changing economic conditions altered long-established trade networks. Perhaps production declined at distant salt sources. No one knows for certain. What we do know is that a city containing thousands of people and enormous cattle herds required a constant supply. Without it, problems would emerge quickly. Many historians find this explanation compelling. Others remain skeptical. They argue that no great civilization collapses because of a single issue. Reality is usually more complicated, and they may be right. There is no ancient document explaining the departure. No surviving ruler left behind a final message. No inscription records a salt shortage. The evidence is indirect, logical, biological. Humans can survive without gold. Neither humans nor cattle can survive without salt. Yet even if salt shortages played a role, They were likely only one symptom of a much larger problem. By the 15th century, Great Zimbabwe had supported a large population for centuries. The demands placed upon the surrounding environment were immense. The city needed timber, huge quantities of timber, wood for homes, wood for fences, wood for cooking fires, wood for mining operations, wood converted into charcoal for ironworking. Generation after generation, trees disappeared from the surrounding landscape. At the same time, thousands upon thousands of cattle grazed the nearby grasslands. Year after year, decade after decade, the pressure increased. As vegetation disappeared, soil became vulnerable. Seasonal rains carried valuable topsoil away. Fertile land gradually lost its productivity. Meanwhile, farmers continued cultivating the same fields. Nutrients were slowly depleted. Harvests became less reliable. The land itself was becoming exhausted. It is a pattern repeated throughout history. A successful city grows larger. Its population increases. Its needs expand. Eventually, the environment struggles to keep pace. The very success of the civilization creates new vulnerabilities. Modern archaeological research provides evidence supporting this interpretation. Studies of ancient pollen samples and soil deposits indicate significant deforestation during the period of Great Zimbabwe's greatest prosperity. Evidence of erosion also becomes increasingly visible. The environment was under strain, and then nature may have added another challenge: climate. The decline of Great Zimbabwe coincides with broader climatic changes associated with the early stages of what historians call the Little Ice Age. While global, temperatures shifted in various ways. Parts of southern Africa may have experienced prolonged periods of reduced rainfall. Drought. For a society dependent upon agriculture and livestock, drought could be devastating. No amount of gold could create rain. No stone wall could stop the sky from remaining empty. Water became increasingly important and increasingly scarce. One of Great Zimbabwe's most significant water sources was a spring located near the hill complex. For generations, it helped sustain the city. But a growing population combined with reduced rainfall could place enormous pressure upon even reliable sources. A few consecutive dry years may have transformed a manageable challenge into a crisis. Historians and climate researchers continue to debate the exact role of drought. Was it the primary cause of decline, or merely the final pressure applied to a society already struggling with environmental and economic challenges? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. The decline of Great Zimbabwe was probably not caused by one event, or one decision, or one disaster. It was the result of many forces working together: trade networks changing, resources becoming scarcer, forests disappearing, soils weakening, rainfall declining, a slow accumulation of pressures. And so the people adapted. Families left in search of better opportunities. Communities relocated to regions with richer grazing land. Clans migrated toward more reliable water sources. The process was gradual, almost peaceful. There was likely no single day when someone announced that Great Zimbabwe had ended. No dramatic farewell, no final ceremony. The city simply became quieter. A few houses were abandoned, then a few more. Years passed. Generations passed. The bustling capital slowly began to empty, not with violence, not with catastrophe, but with silence. The same silence that still rests among its stone walls today. Great Zimbabwe did not disappear in a single moment. Its decline was gradual. Its silence arrived slowly, and as the old capital faded, something else was already beginning, for history rarely tolerates a vacuum. When one great power weakens, another often rises to take its place. The decline of Great Zimbabwe was no exception. While the old city struggled with environmental pressures, shifting trade routes, and a changing climate, new centers of power were emerging across the region. The people who built Great Zimbabwe did not vanish. Their civilization did not collapse. Instead, it evolved. It moved. It adapted. And in doing so, it created new kingdoms that would carry the traditions of the Shona world into a new era. As families gradually left the old capital, they carried more than possessions with them. They carried knowledge, skills, beliefs, architectural traditions, trade networks, and memories. The great city was not dying. Its people were simply building new futures elsewhere. Two major successor states emerged from this transformation. The first was the Kingdom of Mut. Far to the north, beyond the lands surrounding Great Zimbabwe, a new power began to take shape along the fertile valleys connected to the mighty Zambezi River. According to Shona oral traditions, the founder of this kingdom was a prince from Great Zimbabwe named Nyatsimba Mutapa. His story has survived through generations. He was sent north on a mission of enormous importance, not to find gold, not to conquer new territory, but to secure a reliable source of salt. The detail is fascinating, and perhaps deeply revealing. If the oral traditions preserve even a fragment of historical truth, they may support the idea that access to salt had become an increasingly serious concern for the old capital. Mutata's journey eventually led him to fertile lands, rich in resources and strategically positioned along important trade routes. There he established a new dynasty, a new center of power, a new kingdom. The rulers of this state carried the title Muin Mut, meaning something close to Lord of the Conquered Lands. When Portuguese traders later encountered the kingdom, they transformed the title into a name that would become famous throughout Europe, Monomotapa, a name surrounded by myths, legends, and tales of immense wealth. In many ways, the kingdom of Mutapa became the spiritual and political heir of Great Zimbabwe. Yet it was not the only successor. To the southwest, another powerful kingdom emerged. The kingdom of Butua. Its capital was the remarkable city of Kami. Like the builders of Great Zimbabwe, the people of Kami were masters of stone architecture, but they developed their own distinctive style. The differences are immediately noticeable. Great Zimbabwe is famous for its towering freestanding walls. Kami embraced a different vision. Its builders constructed elaborate stone terraces along hillsides. Layer upon layer of carefully crafted retaining walls transformed the landscape into a series of elevated platforms. The stonework remained extraordinary, yet it represented a clear evolution of the architectural tradition, not a copy. A continuation, an innovation, proof that the culture responsible for Great Zimbabwe remained vibrant and creative. This is perhaps the most important lesson of the city's decline. Great Zimbabwe did not represent the end of a civilization. It represented a transition. The old center faded. New centers emerged. The flame continued burning. Only the location changed. The traditions of cattle herding remained. The gold trade continued. The skills of stone construction survived. The people adapted to new realities and carried their civilization forward. As Mutapa and Kami expanded, they naturally attracted trade. Merchants followed opportunity. Trade routes shifted. Gold and ivory began flowing toward new capitals. The Swahili merchants of the coast cared little for old loyalties. They followed commerce. Where wealth moved, they moved as well. As the new kingdoms gained influence, Great Zimbabwe became increasingly bypassed. Less trade arrived. Fewer people stayed. The old city slowly lost its central role. Historians continue to debate the relationship between these successor kingdoms and the abandoned capital. Did the new rulers deliberately break away from Great Zimbabwe? Were rival dynasties competing for power? Or did they still regard the old city as a sacred homeland connected to their ancestors? The answer may have been a mixture of all three. Political power may have moved elsewhere, yet spiritual significance often survives long after political influence disappears. Even as Great Zimbabwe ceased to be a capital, it may have remained a place of memory, a place of pilgrimage, a place where people could still feel connected to the generations who came before them. The old city had fulfilled its purpose. Its people had grown beyond it. Its children had left home. And now the ancestral city could finally rest. Meanwhile, life continued elsewhere. New houses appeared in new workshops opened in Komi. New trade routes carried wealth across the region. Yet every new beginning carried a hidden cost. For every home built in a rising kingdom, another home stood empty in Great Zimbabwe. The Great Migration was underway. Not dramatic, not violent, simply persistent. Imagine how it must have felt. A farming family notices declining harvests. Travelers speak of fertile lands farther north. Opportunity beckons. So they leave. Years later, a talented blacksmith receives an invitation to work in a growing city where demand for his skills is greater. He leaves as well. A young trader hears stories of fortunes being made along the Zambezi River. He follows the opportunity. One family leaves, then another, then another. The process continues for decades, perhaps generations. Archaeology supports this image. There is no evidence of a catastrophic end, no citywide destruction, no signs of conquest. Instead, the material record gradually thins. Fewer homes, fewer tools, fewer traces of daily life, until eventually the evidence fades away. This is one of the most unusual endings in the ancient world. Most great cities fall dramatically. They burn, they flood, they are conquered. Great Zimbabwe simply became quieter. The city did not die with a roar. It faded with a sigh. You can almost imagine one of its final rulers, still residing among magnificent stone walls, still honoring ancient traditions, yet increasingly aware that the future of his people lies elsewhere. The city remains beautiful, but it is no longer the center of the world. It has become a monument to memory. Even after political life moved away, Great Zimbabwe likely remained occupied in some form. Small groups probably continued tending sacred sites. Priests may have remained near the hill complex, guardians of ancestral traditions, keepers of sacred knowledge, caretakers of memory. The city became something different, not a capital, a shrine, a connection to the past. Historians continue to debate how long this process lasted. Did the final abandonment occur within a few decades? Or did it unfold slowly over more than a century? The evidence remains uncertain. What is certain is that nature gradually reclaimed what humanity left behind. Grass spread through abandoned courtyards. Trees returned. The clay walls of thousands of homes softened beneath seasonal rains. Pottery shattered and disappeared beneath the soil. Slowly, patiently, the landscape absorbed the city once again. The great stone walls endured, but life moved elsewhere. For nearly 2 centuries, Great Zimbabwe rested in silence. Known to local communities, respected by descendants of its builders, yet largely forgotten beyond the region. Still, stories remained. Legends survived. Rumors of a wealthy stone city hidden deep within Africa continued to circulate, whispered from merchant to merchant, passed from traveler to traveler. Eventually, those stories reached distant ears. Across the sea, across continents, a new age was approaching, and with it came a very different kind of visitor. European explorers. The city slept peacefully beneath the African sun, its walls wrapped in grass and memory. But the wider world was changing, and it was changing rapidly. Soon, Great Zimbabwe would be discovered once again. For nearly 2 centuries, Great Zimbabwe slept. Its stone walls stood silently beneath the African sun. Grass grew between its pathways. Trees and vines slowly embraced its ancient masonry. The voices of kings, priests, merchants, and craftsmen had long since faded away. Yet beyond the savannah, the world was changing, and it was changing rapidly. A new age had arrived. Across the oceans, European kingdoms were searching for wealth, power, and new trade routes. Their ships ventured farther than ever before, and eventually they reached the shores of East Africa. The first arrivals were the Portuguese. Unlike the graceful dhows of the Indian Ocean, their ships looked very different. Tall vessels with square-rigged sails, floating fortresses armed with cannon, carrying soldiers, merchants, missionaries, and adventurers. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, Portuguese fleets had rounded the southern tip of Africa and entered the ancient commercial world of the Indian Ocean. What they found astonished them. The Swahili city-states were wealthy, the markets were vibrant, trade flourished, and everywhere they looked, one thing stood out: gold, huge quantities of gold, gold arriving from somewhere deep within the African interior. The Portuguese became obsessed with discovering its source. Where was this wealth coming from? Who controlled it? And could they seize it for themselves? When they questioned local merchants, they heard stories. Stories of powerful kingdoms beyond the coast. Stories of great rulers. Stories of a distant land connected to immense wealth. Among these stories were tales of a remarkable stone city hidden deep in land, a place known by names that European ears struggled to understand, a place connected to the legendary gold trade. These stories fascinated the newcomers, yet they rarely understood them correctly. Most Portuguese officials never actually visited Great Zimbabwe. Their knowledge came from merchants, travelers, interpreters. Rumors repeated and reshaped over countless conversations. Fact blended with legend. Reality mixed with imagination. Many Portuguese writers confused Great Zimbabwe with the kingdom of Mutapa, which had become the dominant regional power after the old capital's decline. To them, all these stories seemed connected. A wealthy king, gold, ancient stone structures, an inland empire. Unable to separate the different pieces, they merged them together, and then they made a much larger mistake. They attempted to explain Africa through European ideas. The Portuguese looked at reports describing a great stone city filled with mystery and wealth. To them, the answer seemed obvious. This had to be the biblical land of Ivory, the legendary source of King Solomon's gold. The great stone structures must surely have been connected to the Queen of Sheba, or perhaps Solomon's temple. These theories spread quickly, not because they were supported by evidence, but because they fit European expectations. The possibility that African people had created such a city simply did not occur to many observers, and when it did, many chose to reject it. Thus began one of the longest-lasting myths in African history. For centuries, Great Zimbabwe would be interpreted not through African history, but through European imagination. It became a biblical mystery, a lost kingdom, a forgotten colony of ancient foreigners, anything except what it actually was. The achievement of indigenous African builders. Historians continue to debate how much the Portuguese truly understood about the interior. Some traders traveled considerable distances. Some missionaries visited powerful African courts. Yet no definitive eyewitness account survives from a Portuguese visitor who clearly described the ruins of Great Zimbabwe during this early period. The city remained elusive, half remembered, half imagined. As centuries passed, the stories became even more distorted. The gold trade declined, political power shifted, knowledge faded. Great Zimbabwe gradually transformed into something resembling a legend, a lost city, an African El Dorado. Mapmakers placed it on charts, travelers repeated stories about it, yet very few people actually knew where it was, or what it truly represented. Meanwhile, the ruins continued to sleep. The local Shona communities never forgot them. The city remained part of their historical memory, part of their landscape, part of their identity. But beyond southern Africa, the truth became increasingly obscured. Then came the 19th century, and with it came a new wave of Europeans, hunters, missionaries, prospectors, colonists, men driven by curiosity, profit, and imperial ambition. In 1867, a German-American hunter named Adam Render encountered the ruins. Several years later, the German geologist Karl Moch visited the site and introduced news of the city to a fascinated European audience. The reaction was immediate and revealing. European scholars found themselves facing an uncomfortable reality. Here stood undeniable evidence of a sophisticated African civilization, a vast stone city, a remarkable engineering achievement, a center of power and trade. Yet many Europeans simply could not accept what the evidence suggested. The dominant colonial ideology of the era was built upon assumptions of racial superiority. Colonial rule depended upon the belief that Africans were incapable of creating advanced civilizations. Great Zimbabwe challenged that belief directly. The ruins contradicted the entire narrative. Faced with this contradiction, many chose not to change their beliefs. Instead, they changed the story. If Africans could not have built Great Zimbabwe, then someone else must have done it. This became the foundation of a new mythology. Karl Moch himself became convinced that the city was connected to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Others proposed different theories. Some claimed Phoenician sailors had built it. Others suggested Egyptians. Some argued for Arabs. Others invented entirely new explanations. The details varied. The assumption remained the same. The builders had to be foreigners. The logic was deeply flawed and deeply revealing. A magnificent city existed. Therefore, according to colonial thinking, Africans could not have built it. The conclusion had already been decided before any evidence was examined. Great Zimbabwe became a mirror reflecting European prejudices rather than African history, and the consequences were serious. This was not merely an academic debate. The myth helped justify colonial rule. If Africans had never built the city, then Europeans could claim ownership of its legacy. The false story became politically useful, which made it remarkably difficult to challenge. When the territory later came under the control of the British South Africa Company, led by Cecil Rhodes, the myth gained official support. Colonial authorities actively promoted non-African theories of origin. The first major investigator appointed to study the ruins, Richard Hall, approached the site with a predetermined conclusion. He was not interested in discovering the truth. He wanted evidence supporting the story he already believed. In his search for imagined foreign builders, he caused enormous damage. Layers of archaeological deposits associated with the Shona people were dismissed as worthless contamination. Large portions were removed and discarded. Artifacts were destroyed. Evidence vanished. It was one of the greatest acts of archaeological vandalism in African history. Ironically, while mythmakers damaged the site, real archaeologists were beginning to uncover the truth. In 1905, David Randall Mickever conducted a professional investigation. His conclusions were clear. The city was medieval. The artifacts were African. The builders were African. A generation later, Gertrude Catton Thompson arrived. Her work confirmed the same conclusion. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no mystery, no Phoenicians, no biblical builders, no lost colony from the Mediterranean. Great Zimbabwe was exactly what the archaeological record indicated, a remarkable achievement of indigenous African civilization. Yet myths supported by power rarely disappear quickly. Despite the growing scientific consensus, colonial authorities continued promoting the old story. Textbooks repeated it. Schools taught it. Official narratives protected it. For decades, evidence and ideology existed side by side, one supported by archaeology, the other supported by politics. And so the battle for the true history of Great Zimbabwe continued, not among its stone walls, but within books, museums, governments, and the minds of those determined to decide who deserved credit for one of Africa's greatest achievements. Even as colonial writers and officials attempted to erase the true history of Great Zimbabwe, the city itself continued to reveal its secrets, slowly, patiently, stone by stone. From the sacred ground of the eastern enclosure, within the hill complex emerged the most powerful symbols ever discovered at the site. The Zimbabwe Birds. Imagine standing there during their rediscovery. A worker's tool strikes stone hidden beneath centuries of earth. Carefully, the soil is brushed away. Gradually, a carved figure emerges into the sunlight. A silent guardian returning to the world after hundreds of years. There were 8 of these remarkable sculptures, each carved from a single piece of soapstone, each unique, each mysterious. At first glance, they resemble birds of prey, perhaps eagles, perhaps creatures associated with power and spiritual authority. Yet they are not realistic representations. Their forms are stylized, symbolic. Some possess distinctly human characteristics, human-like lips, human-like toes. They seem to exist somewhere between the human and the divine. Each bird originally stood upon a tall stone column, watching, guarding, observing the kingdom below. Like the conical tower, their exact meaning remains uncertain. The songs once sung before them are gone. The ceremonies associated with them have vanished. The stories that gave them life have been carried away by time. Yet their importance is unmistakable. Most scholars believe the birds represented royal authority and ancestral power. Within Shona's spiritual traditions, birds of prey often served as messengers between worlds. Creatures capable of traveling between earth and sky, between humanity and the divine. The birds may therefore have symbolized communication between the living rulers and the spirits of their ancestors. Guardians of kingship, guardians of memory, guardians of the nation itself. Yet the story of the birds did not end with their discovery. In many ways, a new chapter was only beginning, and it was not a happy one. The birds became victims of the colonial era. Rather than remaining in the land where they had been created, several were removed from Great Zimbabwe. The colonial magnate Cecil Rhodes became fascinated by them. Some were taken to his estate in South Africa. Others eventually found their way into museums and collections far from their homeland. The irony was profound. The very objects that demonstrated the creativity and sophistication of the Shona civilization were taken away from the descendants of the people who had created them. For decades, the birds lived in exile, separated from the landscape that had given them meaning, separated from the people whose history they represented. Their journey home would take generations. Following Zimbabwe's independence in 1980, efforts began to recover these priceless cultural treasures. Slowly, one by one, the birds returned. The final return took place in 2003. It was more than the recovery of archaeological artifacts. It was an act of cultural restoration, a reclaiming of memory, a reclaiming of identity, a reclaiming of history itself. Today, the Zimbabwe bird has become the most important national symbol of modern Zimbabwe. Its image appears on the national flag, on official seals, on coins and banknotes. What began as a sacred symbol carved nearly 1,000 years ago now represents an entire modern nation. It is a remarkable story, created by an anonymous artist, buried for centuries, rediscovered, taken away, returned home, and ultimately transformed into a symbol recognized throughout the world. The bird survived everything: kingdoms, empires, colonialism, myths, and with the return of the birds came something equally important: the return of the truth. For decades, archaeologists had been quietly assembling the evidence, patiently documenting, carefully excavating, methodically testing theories. Their conclusions were consistent. The builders of Great Zimbabwe were not Phoenicians, not Egyptians, not Arabs, not lost biblical peoples. They were African, specifically the ancestors of the Shona people. The scientific evidence became overwhelming. Among the most important figures in this process was the archaeologist Gertrude Thompson. Following her investigations in 1929, she reached a clear and decisive conclusion. Everything found at Great Zimbabwe pointed toward an indigenous African origin. The pottery, the tools, the architecture, the cultural traditions, all of it. The evidence spoke with remarkable clarity, yet facts alone are not always enough to overcome prejudice. For many decades, colonial authorities continued promoting alternative explanations. The myths survived because they served political purposes. They justified power. They justified control. And so they endured long after the evidence had disproven them. Eventually, however, reality prevailed. In 1980, the state, formerly known as Rhodesia, became the independent nation of Zimbabwe. The choice of name was deeply significant. The new nation deliberately linked itself to the legacy of the ancient city. It was a declaration, a statement that the history of this land did not begin with colonization. Its roots extended far deeper, into the medieval kingdoms of southern Africa, into the achievements of the Shona civilization, into the stone walls that still stand beneath the African sky. Today, Great Zimbabwe is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors come from around the world to walk among its ruins, to touch its ancient walls, to stand within the great enclosure, to climb the hill complex, and to reflect upon the extraordinary civilization that once flourished here. Archaeologists continue their work. New technologies reveal hidden structures beneath the soil. Ground-penetrating radar maps buried foundations without disturbing sacred ground. Research continues. Questions remain. The exact purpose of the conical tower, the deeper meanings of the Zimbabwe birds, the details of everyday life within the city. These mysteries endure, and perhaps they always will. But the greatest mystery has been solved. The question that lingered for centuries: who built this place? The answer is now clear. You are not standing in the ruins of a lost foreign colony. You are standing in the capital of one of medieval Africa's greatest kingdoms. A city built by African hands. A city sustained by African knowledge. A city shaped by African imagination. The silence surrounding the ruins no longer feels empty. It feels dignified, patient, peaceful, as the afternoon sun settles across the stone walls. The story gently comes to an end. The miners descending into dark shafts. The traders walking dusty roads toward the coast. The merchants of Sofala. The great Dhows sailing upon the monsoon winds. The kings who ruled from stone palaces. The mysterious birds watching from their carved pedestals. Their voices slowly fade into memory, like the final moments of a dream. The journey is complete. The city is at peace. Its true history has been restored. Its story has been told. Nothing more needs to be solved. Nothing more needs to be proven. There is only quiet now. The quiet that follows a long journey. The quiet of ancient stone. And the quiet certainty that Great Zimbabwe will continue to endure long after all of us are gone. And now you can rest.